success with IATEFL Poland. So you are an assistant language specialist representing the University of Kansas, and as far as your educational background is concerned, it has a number of different other universities here, among others also Georgia State University. You have many different areas of specialization, and the main ones: curriculum design, technology enhancement, and this is what we are working on right now, and also teacher professional development and training. So you will train us tonight as well to become better teachers. I am not going to mention the stages in your professional career, although I have to say that they are really impressive. I will just mention your webinars so far. So the first webinar with Emily was about online language teaching. And that concentrated on the creation of very dynamic learning environment, which is not always so obvious with online teaching as such. In the next webinar, Emily reminded us about the choices that we have within the area of technological technologies, different technologies. But what was the most important point in that webinar, which is recorded, and if somebody feels like watching it, you are welcome to do so. What works, Emily reminded us what works and what doesn't. And that is like testing for us different systems so that we don't have to spend time on it. So that was, in this sense, it was very valuable for me, for example. Today, Emily is going to tell us about differentiated learning online, which sounds quite logical, but it's not so easy to do, especially when you manage online classes, which are big classes, yes, big groups of students. So active learning and how to differentiate learning online. And in her summary, Emily reminds us that language learning is not just the same for everybody, so one size fits all. And therefore, students are aware of this, but teachers have to make it possible for them to develop their skills, their knowledge, while catering for the whole variety of individual needs. And this, of course, requires a lot of work. Yes, and so we will get some guidelines about managing large classes, multi-level proficiency classes, and also create courses which will be interesting for our students. And so we will learn something, briefly speaking, about managing large classes, managing multi-level proficiency classes, and managing students in general. But this is not the end of the story. I would like to remind you that Emily is going to have one more webinar for us on the 28th of January, which is a Thursday. Emily will tell us something about continued professional development, combining online teaching skills with teaching skills in general. Yes, so she will refer to communities of practice, motivation, and last but not least, that is something that I am also concerned about: teacher networking. So over to you.
All right, thank you. Wonderful. Okay, so good evening, everyone. I know it's late, so I will try to keep this as engaging as possible. If this is your first webinar with me here on Click, it's actually really nice. I am able to see the chat quite easily, so I will try to answer your questions as we go, in addition to having reserving time at the end. So feel free, if you have questions, feel free to go ahead and ask those questions, and I will try to answer as we go. Again, it's afternoon here in Kansas, and a little bit cold, but luckily sunny today. So I'm happy to see the sunshine here. So again, thank you for being here. I know you're so busy and it's been a long day. So I'm hoping that you can get as much from this as possible. I see a lot of people from different areas. I'm just amazed, and I'm so thrilled and honored to be with you today as well. So again, my name is Emily. I am a language specialist at the University of Kansas here in Kansas, USA. And I also am an English language specialist with the English language programs and the US Department of State. So today, again, we're going to focus on differentiated learning, and not necessarily, that's a very, very broad category in terms of just general teaching, but we're going to focus on what that looks like for language teaching, specifically English language teaching. And then again, what does that look like online as well? Most likely you're already doing this in your classes in a face-to-face scenario. It's just the easiest way to teach. In a lot of ways, you can't teach English or teach any language without being able to differentiate that there are different levels of language learning and different speeds at which students learn. But we want to focus on what does this look like in an online setting. So the way this is going to work, I'm going to give a little bit of background, talk a little bit about differentiated instruction, what that looks like in a curriculum setting, some strategies, ideas. We're going to get into a little bit about technology for how you would use this. And then we're going to get into some breakout rooms. I do want you guys to engage with each other as step one to creating a network. We're from, again, we've got people here from Germany and from Poland, from the UK and India. And so we are now a network. We are colleagues that we can learn from each other and not you just learning from me. And so I think this is step one to creating that network. So again, just a little bit of background. Why do we need to differentiate our instruction? I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because this is what you already know. We have learners with varied backgrounds. They're coming into the classroom with various needs. They have varied linguistic abilities. So we know, where they are in terms of their first language and in terms of acquiring a second or third or fourth language could be very different. We have learners with varied interests. So the topics they're interested in or the hobbies that they are engaged with are all very different, even in a classroom of peers. We have learners with varied academic skills. So this is quite common for me. My context, I teach at a university, and we have students from all over the world that come, and their academic backgrounds are very different. Learners with varied resources. So even if you live in the same city, there's no guarantee that you have the same amount of technology at your home, especially for if you're teaching online and you're not in a classroom, there's no way to ensure that everyone's coming with the same amount of resources. Varied motivation. Some students really enjoy learning languages, some do not. And so coming with motivation. And again, we know that motivation obviously aids in language learning. Varied access to L1 input. So in terms of getting, access to English and particularly English that's interesting and at the right level for students can be varied depending on where you are, what access you have to internet, etc. And then lastly, learners with varied preferences. So some learners don't like peer work. Some learners don't like group work. I am one of those. I don't generally like group work in terms of summative assessment because if you have people that don't work as hard as you do, you end up doing all the work and then it's not fun. And so I've definitely been in that scenario and it's not my favorite. And so again, trying to think through my own teacher bias in terms of what I like and then what's best for for students as well. So getting into the good part, let's talk about differentiated instruction. So you may already know about this. I'm just going to do a quick overview. Essentially, differentiated instruction is an approach where teachers adjust their curriculum and instruction to maximize learning. I took out a good bit of this, but again, we're focusing on how are we adjusting curriculum to not necessarily to make it easier or harder for some students, but to make sure that they can get what they need to be able to learn the curriculum that may be more standardized in the courses. And what the different students need will differ by student, certainly. So just a couple of points that I wanted to focus on in terms of research, and then the rest of this will be quite practical. So again, within a class, then you have to think about how you're going to adapt any type of content, the process for how that you're learning, what you want students to do at the end. Maybe you have students that are multi-proficiency within one course. So are they going to be required to create the same product at the end? What will that look like? Again, are you going to vary the environment at all? And then thinking about assessment. Are you assessing them all the same, or are you going to make some different changes there as well? And then also, if you think about, and I thought this was quite interesting, this quote, and if you want to read more about it, there is references at the end, but they talked about the idea that good teaching quality has nine domains. And that would include safe and stimulating learning climate. So we know that. Classroom management. So again, differentiated instruction goes into classroom management as a part of that. Involvement and motivation of students. Explanation of subject matter. So that's of course makes sense. Quality of subject matter, cognitive activation, assessment, differentiated instruction, and teaching, learning, and student self-regulation. So it's interesting to me that in this research, they're including differentiated instruction as one of the 9 domains of quality teaching. So being able to ensure that each of your students are getting what they need to be successful, to meet the learning outcomes, to meet the content in your course is really important. And again, how are we going to do that? Online with large classes, with limited resources, and all of those things. So first, I want to make just one brief caveat, and then we can move on from this. Previously, in my first webinar, I talked a little bit, I believe, about universal design. So the concept of when you design your course online, there are practices that are outside of language learning that you use to decide how you're going to design your curriculum for students and what those practices are. So again, you're looking at the kind of the big picture. But today we're not focusing on big picture, how you design an online course. We're focusing on, again, the actual instruction. So you meet your students, and now how are you going to, it goes with planning, but it's not necessarily the same as designing a course. It's more just about how are you going to deliver your content in a way that's best for everyone. So again, I think of this as support. How are we going to teach multi-level classes online, particularly if you have students? And it's impossible. No amount of testing will put every student at the same level. It's just that never seems to happen. So what would some curriculum and assessment strategies look like? Let's talk about curriculum first. So if we're thinking about instruction, what is the teacher's role versus the student's role? I often think for differentiated instruction that the teacher is a facilitator. You're not necessarily delivering the information. And I think that's one thing that's very different about online teaching. If you're used to teaching and in a lecture style and teacher-centered teaching, then online teaching is very different because it's really hard to have a captive audience. So that's why we're going to do breakout rooms, because it's hard for you to listen to me for hours on end and not engage with just someone talking at you. And so really trying to have a way to have a facilitator and not just someone delivering information as well. Maybe you need to have additional instruction for lower proficiency. So there may need to be additional videos or additional support for students that have lower proficiency. It may not be, trying to have the student just, hey, here's the standard and raise to it, certainly, but they may need some information to be able to do that. And then amount of feedback. Students with lower proficiency may need and likely will need more feedback and more scaffolding to be able to get to where they need to be. Content, you may need to adjust the amount of content you have or the scope of the project of what you're asking students to do, depending on if you have varied classes in terms of differentiating the content you give students. You may need to give them additional time to submit to submit an assignment to you in order to get some help. And then again, more scaffolding. The process for how you do it, you may decide you want to set up different tasks a bit differently. So if you think about what you would do in a classroom, you'd have centers. So I know you probably know what I'm talking about, where the teacher is here and you have groups of students around the room and the teacher walks around the room and gives feedback, but the students go to each center and do different things. So at one center, they're working on, vocabulary, and the next center, they're working on grammar worksheets, and then the teacher is going around helping students and not teaching. So again, how could you set that up online where the students have different tasks that maybe are more difficult or more information that they can do online? And maybe you want to do breakout rooms like what we're going to do, or maybe the assignment is different. Maybe there's additional discussion board support, or however you're engaging with students. How you group students will matter. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then again, how are you managing your classes? I'm doing this online workshop myself on assessment. It's been quite interesting. And I missed a detail in the email. And I was just really amazed that I got an immediate email from the teacher saying, oh, you missed this detail. Please make sure you get this by, turn this in by 11:59. And so again, just really being focusing on managing when students are missing things, what do they need? And again, what learners need more support and what learners need less support, and I can give them more autonomy. And then environment. So again, making sure that as much as you can, how does your online course lend to getting individualized help versus not having to spend all of your time meeting with each student one-on-one, but how can you ensure that the students have access to you as they need you, but then also they can work independently as well. You want to make sure that you're not labeling the grouping. So you may decide to group like, 2 low-level learners together, but you don't necessarily want to make that very obvious because you want them to feel confident that they're able to do the work. And then again, adjusting to student needs and interests. So how can as much, as you can with curriculum, make it engaging and active, give them activities that are engaging and active for that particular group of students, what they're interested in. So for example, if they're interested in sports, how can you pull in real world examples, maybe with football, maybe I have a lot of students that are interested in basketball. So how can I talk to them about basketball and pull that content into what we're doing? And again, I'm trying to find a way to make it individualized for the students. So moving on, let's look at what this would look like. So a couple strategies. The first one is grouping, and you'll have this PDF, but there's a lot of information if you click this link at American English at State that talks about different examples for how you could group students. So this particular one is very interesting in the sense of, you can see in this one particular course, they have beginners and advanced. So that's not how we do, again, grouping at my university, but you may still have students that fit within that range. Probably not to that extreme, but definitely I've had students with very, very beginner, and then students that are a higher beginner. And then again, how are you differentiating from there? So in this particular example, what they did is decide to meet with the beginner students on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and then the advanced on Tuesday and Thursday. So the first you can notice that they're meeting with the beginners more often. And then you'll also note that these are very small groups that they're doing. And then in addition to that, and you may not be able to do that in your context, you may not be able to say, I'm going to meet with the lower level students, on different days. But if that's something you can do in your context and you feel that would be helpful, that may be a possibility. And then you'll also notice they're working on a similar concept, but quite differently. So for example, the beginner group, they're going to review vocabulary and play a matching game. Concentration is a card game. Then they're going to work on more matching vocabulary, and they're going to write some sentences. And then finally, review the vocabulary words and try to fill in the blank. So that's what the beginners are doing. Meanwhile, the advanced students are using the same vocabulary from the book, from the unit, but now they're going to make a skit. So they're going to do some acting, they're going to write their own skit and use the vocabulary there. The teacher's probably facilitating. A lot of this could be done a little more independently. And then on Thursday, they can create their skit. They can keep working on their script. They're going to practice it. Maybe the next week they come back and perform. Maybe the advanced group performs for the lower level students. And that's a way for them to still see some of the vocabulary in action. But again, in a way that everybody's getting what they need, but also in a way you would want to set it up in a way that nobody feels left out from the groupings there. And again, you may not be able to completely do this, or maybe you can do this once a term. It just kind of depends on your context. Another option is to think through how you're doing your lesson planning. So if you think about, you may start, so for example, if you're meeting them in Zoom or whatever technology, if you're using live sessions, if you're not using live sessions, this is a little different. But if you're using some live sessions to teach, you may start out with something whole. So all of the students are in the same group, just kind of like what we're doing. And then you may decide to put them into breakout rooms. So here, the teacher goes to this group, the teacher is giving them instructions, teaching to them. Meanwhile, in the other group, breakout room or breakout rooms, depending on how many students you have, the students are working independently. So you would have to definitely have set this up beforehand, but you'd have some way to get them the different information that they need, or even it's the same information. Even if you give them the same activity, same worksheet, same everything, how can you do that in a way where you're working with this group, they're still doing something, and then you're going to switch back and forth like we just practiced here with breakout rooms. And then again, once this other group of students is working on something, teacher goes to the other group, and then finally, you can't quite see, but at the end, you would be able to come back and have an activity where everybody's working together and they're able to close it. What that final activity is probably going to be quite simple if you have students that are a range of learners, but maybe not. Maybe if you have students that are roughly all the same proficiency, but they need more individualized help, this is something that you could do. And it's very possible to do in an online class with breakout rooms, in teams. You can put people in channels. There's definitely technology to get at what this is talking about. Another option is to do this a little bit similarly, but different. So again, everybody's meeting together like we're doing. You have two different groups of students. Everybody's kind of there. While they're working independently in their breakout rooms, the teacher's just kind of going back and forth to both groups. So the teacher would stay there not very long, check in really quickly, go to the other group, check in quickly, and then just keep toggling back and forth. Come back together. Okay, let's see your project. Maybe it's a whiteboard. Maybe they've done some research. They're going to show a video. Maybe they're going to present something to the class and share their screens. Whatever you want, these two groups are going to come back together. And again, how you group them is completely up to you. It could be random. It could be purposeful based on personality, interest, topic, skill, proficiency, background, resources, technology skill. Some students, I always would want, for me personally, to have a student who's good with technology in each group. So that way, if I say share your screen, not a problem, go to Quizlet, do this. So I don't know if you use Quizlet. I really love that website for vocabulary. And I have done that where I say, okay, go to Quizlet, show your screen, go to Quizlet and run Quizlet. Like I've created it. Here's the link. And because you can do games with Quizlet. I don't know if you know, let me type that in the chat box, quizlet.com. It's really great. The teacher version is great, but unfortunately it's paid. But I like to use that a lot. Even in the face-to-face classroom, I have the students come up and run the monitor, and I just kind of sit back and give them, some feedback. But they can run like space races, they can do quizzes, they have to learn to type, and they start competing with each other. It's actually quite fun. And Quizlet Live will group them into groups, and then they have to compete against each other. Again, that's a paid feature, but it's an idea. Okay, back to online. Essentially, then same thing. Teacher goes back to groups, and then they come back at the end. Depending on how long your live classes are, if you do live classes, would depend on how many times you could do this or how you would want to set this up. But again, you can notice this is differentiating learning. You can have the groups doing different things. You can have them doing different levels of difficulty. How you group them is up to you, but there is a way to still be able to do that. You don't just have to lecture to students in an online format if you're meeting with them synchronously all at the same time. And that's pretty beautiful in a way. I think a lot of people feel like it's not possible, but it definitely is possible. Okay. And before I I'll pause here a little bit before I started getting into grouping. So let me give you a couple more examples of ideas of what you could do. So one is to, you can level the task of what they're doing for reading, for example. So the same thing, you can see they're working on reading, nonfiction, and vocabulary. So you could give students a graphic organizer, and they're going to use the vocabulary to fill in the graphic organizer. You could give them maybe less scaffolding, so the students have to work together in pairs. And then finally, you could give them a blank organizer or no organizer, and the advanced students, they just simply have to read the text and be able to come up with what they need. So again, you can level a task, same reading, but how you give it to students can be quite different. So again, an easier way would be to give them a graphic organizer, maybe a Venn diagram with the circles or some blanks in it, and the students, it's filled in partially. And then I would eventually take that scaffolding away. For an advanced learner, here's the reading, find the main idea, find the important details, summarize this for me, write, annotate it. You can make it as hard or as easy as you want, depending on the students you have. And then the same thing for vocabulary. So if they're, low-level learners, can they match the vocabulary? Here's the word and the definition. Here's the word and, is it used correctly in the sentence? And then you can, give them missing vocabulary here. And then again, maybe at advanced, you give them a list of vocabulary. So, okay, you're going to write an essay or a paragraph or something, and you have to use this vocabulary and you have to use it correctly. So you have to use it in the context that it's correctly used. And maybe you can decide too, do you want it to be academic or no? So obviously the academic vocabulary is extremely hard compared to easy vocabulary. So you may be able to take really hard vocabulary that all the students have to learn, but then put it in a task that's easier for the students that need more help. And then again, with the goal of getting all students to be able to understand that vocabulary in the context that they need to do it. Okay, another example is how you differentiate grammar. So I love teaching grammar. I think it's a lot of fun. Some students have different backgrounds with grammar. Some students love grammar, some students don't. And a lot of students enjoy really rote grammar. So give them a grammar textbook, they love it. But have them do something creative with grammar, and it's a lot more challenging, but more engaging. So one idea might be able to have students, again, give them a story. Beginners, especially, I love to use narrative. So highlight every time you see the use of be, which would be a lot, or find, present simple in this story. So, underline it, highlight it yellow. If you give them a reading and put it in Google Drive, anything Google, they can just highlight and a lot of that, or use OneNote and they can highlight Word. You have a lot of options for that. For an intermediate, you might have them say, okay, these are some verbs you have to use. You have to use future tense. And I want you to use all possibilities of future tense. So you're going to use will and be going to and all of the variations of that. And I want to see that with all of the adverbs as well. So, tomorrow and all of that as well. So put that in your writing. I want to see those in some sentences. And then for an advanced, again, maybe they're going to the example here is make a poster. Maybe for advanced students, I might have them make a video, make a PowerPoint presentation where you're going to teach me how to use future. And one thing I have noticed about students is, again, their procedural knowledge of grammar is usually quite good. Not always, but often quite good. So I can say to them, okay, you're going to teach me, go back and make sure you understand this. So you're going to teach me how, like, what I need to know about future based on what we've learned in the book, based on what I've talked to you about. And now my job is to tell you how to use it, what it looks like. When do you use future? When do you not use it? Is that correct in this situation, in this context? And that's where I can kind of come in and help students and guide them along. But I'm able to take grammar, and it's still the same concept. Everybody has to learn future. That's one of the, the goals of this class. But how am I going to break that down for different learners that need it? And it's definitely possible to do. And then again, how would I want this to look? So I talked a little bit about grouping before, but like online stations, for example. So maybe in the learning management system you're using, Google Classroom, however you set your course up, you might have different folders. And within those folders, you have different worksheets. Or maybe you have a worksheet set up with adaptive release. So for example, maybe you can't move on, sorry, I can't see my hand. You can't move on to the second one until you finish the first one. And maybe that's the level of scaffolding. That's not a whole lot more work. You're going to give the same worksheets to everybody, but now the timing, like in terms of, if I still don't understand worksheet 1, I can't move on to worksheet 2. So that's where, as a teacher, I'm going to try to step in and see, I only have 50% of my class that's finished worksheet 1. What does that tell me about difficulty level? What do I need to do to come in and try to help support them as much as possible? You can also have students do level jigsaws. So you have them do different activities where you give them some information. They have to meet together and get the information they need from the other person. You can give them harder worksheets for those that need it. You can give students some choice. This is one of my favorite things to do. And I think that often we forget that students sometimes really are good at knowing their own ability. Sometimes not. I've had students that were amazing learners and they're like, oh, my English is terrible. It's like, your English is amazing. And then I've had students that were like, my English is fine. And I'm like, well, there's still some things to work on. So I can't say that's always true, but generally speaking, students have an idea of what they're capable of. And then our job is to encourage them and then to help them get to beyond what we know that they're capable of, and to really have really high expectations, but know that we're going to help them reach their goals and the goals of the course. And so sometimes I like to have students, choose. You're going to decide your topic for this. You're going to decide, do you need scaffolding? So here's what I can offer you. Like, you're going to do this. Do you need an outline? Do you need note cards? Do you need, what do you need to do to be successful in this? This is kind of what I can offer you. And sometimes students will make good choices there. And if they don't, sometimes I can step in and try to help. And then sometimes I just have to require it because they may not make the right decision. So if I have a group of students who really I feel like they need more scaffolding, I may say, okay, for this assignment, you're giving a presentation and you have to turn in for me an outline, note cards, a worksheet that shows me that you know all of the citations for how to give an oral citation, to credit research in a presentation, and all of those types of things. And then finally, I often give students choices in terms of what they want to read. So we're going to read, you have to read this particular one. We're all reading together. We're going to discuss it, but you can do a book report of your choice. You can, watch TED Talk videos of your choice. You can do a lot of things to really help them be able to decide in terms of difficulty level. And I've had students where I say, okay, you can read harder things than this. So I would love to see you do that. I think here's something I think you'd be interested in, is just a way to kind of coach them through that. And again, my role in an online class is more than just giving them information. Sure, I can make videos for them that they can go back and watch. Sure, we can talk in class, but my main goal is how can I set up my course And each session that I meet with them live and then also online, how I've set up the stuff that they work on asynchronously, how can I do that in a way that it feels really personalized, even though they're working together as a group. Here's another example. This is something that I published. I can send you the link here in TESOL that was about a way to talk to students about change and this concept. And it's really, the entire lesson is designed for higher learners. But, one thing you'll see here is that even just examples of a more advanced lesson, there were different parts to that lesson. If you go to TESOL, you'll be able to find this, where it talks about, I'm going to, I have part of a sentence, and I'm going to try to match that with another, person online. So maybe we do that in the chat feature of Zoom, or maybe we do that on a discussion board. So maybe my sentence starter says, change is possible. And then Marcin's says, but it's not easy. So they have to find a way to be able to match something together and then have that discussion. So it's a really interesting video about, can people change? Is it possible? And so it's a lesson plan that's completely about that. But there are different ways that you can take something that's really difficult and really break it down for students and have it work in different places from there. Okay, I don't see any questions so far, so it seems like things are going well. So I'm going to keep going so we can spend a little bit more time in breakout rooms. So quickly, what does differentiated learning look like when you're grouping students together? You can make some decisions. So again, how do you want to group students? So do you want to do pros and cons? Do you want to group pair work and group work? You may decide that you want two students that are both really have a high level of English, or a high level of English in this particular course. You may want to, and consequently, two students that are on the lower end of that spectrum. You may decide that you want a student who's really high proficiency with a lower student so that they can help them. You may let the students choose their own. And again, often they know their own ability fairly well. It's the same thing for group work. You can, again, decide, do you want to do high, low, high-low, or student choice? My best recommendation is a mixture of things, because if you just have the highs together, they will really be able to succeed, where you'll have like a widening gap in terms of ability. But you don't always want to have high-low, because then the high student isn't being challenged, whereas the low student is getting all of the benefit to that relationship. So again, some pros in terms of how are you planning what you're grouping for what you're doing. Again, motivation. You want to make sure that the students are comfortable working together. It's challenging, not too challenging, but also not too comfortable, somewhere a happy medium. You want to make sure that they're growing through their learning with each other. They still have some autonomy. So again, you're facilitating. And then you don't want them, there's no shame. So when students work together, maybe I put them in a breakout room, we come back together, and then they answer. So they're able to answer for each other, and they don't have to feel any nervousness about talking because they have worked with a partner. One difficulty with grouping, again, as I mentioned before, is really about assessment. So if you have students that work together for a group project or pair work, how are you going to decide how to grade that? And that always becomes a challenge in terms of, are you giving them the same assessment? Are you going to lower their score? That just kind of depends from there. Oops. Something happened, not sure. Again, if you have uneven numbers, sometimes you have to participate, so that can be challenging. That's happened, especially online. You're trying to bounce to the different rooms to talk to everyone, so that can be kind of challenging. And then again, it's hard to often know in terms of plagiarism, or even in terms of the amount of work. So you may have one student who's doing the majority of the work and others aren't. How are you going to get that information definitely, if you're doing any type of group work, either face-to-face or online, I'm sure you already do this, but you want to make sure that you have some way to have students self-report workload so that you can get at least a gauge of the amount of time they're spending on something. Another thing you can do in Teams, for example, in channels, it will tell you how long. So you don't have to be there when the students are working together, but you can see, oh, I can see that, these 4 students were there. I can see they were there they met together for an hour. And so that's kind of a nice way to monitor. You may have other technology that does something similar, but that's kind of a nice way to be able to see, are they really working together? Is that working? And how can I differentiate the task for each one? Or maybe I don't. Maybe everybody gets the same task, but how I've grouped them is going to ensure that they can be successful for what I'm asking them to do. But how you group students is always important. And I think even more so online, it's really important. I took an online course once where the idea was that if you had a difficult concept, you would do the readings. Okay, so it was a graduate course. So you would do the readings, and then you would come to your discussion group and you would say, I didn't understand this concept. Can anybody explain it to me? And it was always kind of difficult when no one else could understand it either. And so it's like, well, we can't really help each other, and you're trying to get the TA to try to jump in. And so it can be interesting to make sure, again, as the teacher, that you're putting them in groups, but you're making sure that you're engaging with them as well. And then again, in terms of, I see here, Joanna saying student choice is the most common. Yeah, I definitely sometimes like to do that. But I also sometimes have had students, they choose their friends, and their friends may not be always who I want them grouped with. So I try to vary grouping as much as possible. Every week, I may change partners. I would change groups. I would change, this is your online buddy. You need to check in with this person every Sunday. Do they have any questions? Are they doing okay? Because I'm trying to build community and make sure that they know each other wherever they are. And so that's pretty important. Co-teaching, this may be something that you may have as possible in your context, maybe not. I'll try to speed this up pretty quickly. Basically, if you are in a face-to-face context, I definitely have situations where I have students doing groups, and I might have another teacher come in, and the teacher is working with one group and I'm not. I may also decide, I have done this before, where I have joint office hours with another teacher. The teacher was teaching same group of students, but a different class. And we met together, and the students came and talked to both of us at the same time about what was working and what wasn't. And we both were able to give them advice. And it was amazing that for the most part, the students were performing similarly in both of our courses. And so we were able to kind of share the burden of that in a way. So that's definitely possible in Zoom if you have office hours and you're meeting with students, to give them support and differentiate not just instruction, but feedback. I think that's really important. And then also dividing tasks. So if you have a teacher, is there a way that you can kind of divide some of the workload in terms of creation or giving students feedback? Definitely possible. Again, in an online setting, I often do this. Again, combine classes if you can. Can you visit a colleague's class? So you go to their class and give feedback, or maybe, I'm teaching and someone else is monitoring the chat, or, is there a way to switch classes? Maybe I would teach your class, you teach mine. Are there different ways to, again, the whole goal is to make sure we're differentiating instruction. Sometimes my colleague could explain something that's so much clearer than me, and just being able to switch class for one day might really be effective for my students to get a concept that would be really helpful. Invite a guest speaker. I really like to do that. That could be a colleague you have or anyone that you know that could speak to the students in a way or moderate. And then also, I I don't know why that says for more information, click here. Okay, that seems to be a typo. Apologies there. Okay, so really quickly, if I were in an online course, which I kind of am, and I'm leading the class, this is something actually that's quite nice because you can write on it a picture here. But I'm not sure how well you can see this. I would definitely have put this in Google Docs if I were doing it. But you can see it's a picture of a cat, and the cat is, the cat's a little bit, oh, sorry, it's crooked. The cat is sad. The cat is dreaming about another one of his cat friends, and he's looking out the window kind of forlorn, and that's kind of what's happening. So if I were having a class where I had students with different levels, I would go to the different groups. Maybe let's say I group them, intermediate students and more advanced students. So I might meet with the intermediate students and say, okay, let's tell me what's happening in the story. Let's focus on your verb tense and some organizational features. And then maybe, if I were working, yeah, okay, I've used this chart. Yeah, exactly. It's so much fun. I am such an animal person. And then maybe if I were working, higher intermediate, I might have them make their own chart. So, okay, use this as a reference. Now you're going to work together and you guys are going to make a chart with another animal or another action figure or anime, whatever is up to you. And now you're going to make another chart and you're going to teach the class. You're going to make a video, definitely with another verb. Yeah, we're not going to use lay, definitely with another verb. And so you're going to, make this resource. And so that's another way you can kind of farm out some of the work. The students are learning by making resources, and they're able, and then you're also able to just have the students work independently. They're going to have to learn the structure in order to do the task. And I just think task-based learning works really well online. Additionally, I might give them something like this where they have a word web, and they may have to do something. So a beginner, we're just going to make sure they know these words, and maybe they can give me an example. And the intermediate, now they're going to put them in sentences. Advanced, now they're going to use this, and they have to use every they have to come up with other synonyms, and then find a way to describe something that's using synonyms for happy that's much more advanced, so that they can move away from talking about things in a very simple manner. So again, I would probably have done that in a Google form, something like that, but you can definitely see there's ways to take content and really differentiate what you're doing depending on who you're working with. Again, let's kind of pause here for a second and talk about these. So if you're thinking about your context, which strategy do you think will work best? And then which challenge do you think is most problematic in your context? So essentially, we're going to kind of pause here and actually go ahead and go into some break rooms. So what is one activity you use for differentiating instruction online? So what is something that you use that seems to be working in terms of differentiating instruction online? So what I'm going to do now is put you into breakout rooms, and I want you essentially to answer these questions. We'll come back to this together, so we can all talk about this together, but I just want to give you one question that you can answer. So again, what is one activity that you use for differentiating your instruction online, okay, in your context with your students? So I'm going to put you into breakout rooms. When you get into your breakout rooms, you will need a leader. Make sure you designate someone to be your leader. I'll try to pop into as many as I can. And we won't take a lot of time for this because I still have a few more things to cover. So I think I'll give you like 4 minutes, which really isn't very long. I apologize, to talk to each other. And then when we come back, you guys can report in the chat feature what your activities were so that we can learn from each other. And as IATEFL shares this with you later, you'll be able to use all of these wonderful activities that your wonderful colleagues have now given you. So again, I'm going to put you in breakout rooms. You have 4 minutes to discuss this question. What is one activity you use? Make sure you have a leader, and try to get everyone to share as you can. And we're not going to do 30 minutes, so let me. Okay, so are you guys able to hear me again? Is everyone back here? Okay, awesome. All right. Guys, that was really fun. I really enjoyed. I'm sorry again, we didn't have enough time, but I would have enjoyed getting to obviously if this were a class, we had more time and it weren't nighttime and we weren't all tired. It would have been so nice to go to each room because that's how we learn. That's how we have our community. So just as a plug for the next one, if you come back for the next one, it will be a lot more of that because again, I think that's how you grow in a small community is to be able to talk to each other and network. So I'm looking forward to this next presentation. So what I would love for you to do really quickly is just share a couple ideas that came up. So what is one activity that you use for differentiating instruction online? And I have one that it's not an activity, but it's technology. So if you have Microsoft OneNote, I love it. It works with Teams. You can put different activities there. You can give feedback. There's private folders. There's shared writing. I love everything. I'm just such a fan of OneNote. Padlet, that's awesome. So just share all of your ideas here. This is something that we can see what's going on. MS Forms, love that. Think, Pair, Share is awesome. Man, you guys are amazing teachers. MS Teams, yeah, exactly. Word Wall is great. So as much as you can get students, how can they collaborate? And then again, differentiate. How is everybody getting what they need? Because you can't, here's the thing, you can't teach the same content 10 different times to 10 different students. You have to teach a class, but you have to make sure that those 10 students are with you. Quizzes, these are good, guys. Google discussion. Oh, nice. Okay. All right. So let me get back to where we were. Keep sharing those, please. And then also, again, which strategy do you think works best for you? And again, what are some challenges? Feel free to share those as well. So I'll type these here. So which strategy works best for you and which challenge is most problematic in your context? Okay. All right. Quickly, we're going to wrap it up. So how do you differentiate assessment? I just want to talk about that briefly. You guys keep sharing as I'm going along here. Portfolios are a good one. Portfolios, you're collecting the students' work. So, the students can revise their work. Maybe if I'm lower, I get to revise it 4 times. Maybe you tell the students, listen, you get to decide how many times do you need to revise it. Or I'm going to say, Emily, you have to revise yours 5 times, but maybe, someone else is only 4. Because again, the idea is that I want the best that you can do to meet this end goal. Additional scaffolding, additional modeling. So as much modeling as you can do for the students, modeling with pronunciation, modeling with writing samples is really helpful for students. Varied topics, again, we talked about that. Giving students formulaic language. So instead of just saying, give your opinion about global warming, I'm going to give them some information. So maybe I say, in my opinion, global warming, ... And I would give them something like that. So they don't have to make the entire sentence. Versus an advanced student, in my opinion, global warming is a global problem and it affects every area of our lives. For example, So you get to decide, what do they need? How much help do they need? And I have found even students with really advanced language still need some politeness reminders. I know some friends of mine that need some politeness reminders. You can't just say you're wrong. Your opinion is wrong. You have to be able to find a way to say, I hear what you're saying, but. And so teaching students these communication styles is so important, and it helps their language a lot. Give them a separate rubric. If you can, maybe you can't. Maybe they do the same topic, but you grade them differently if that's possible for you. additional time to submit, allow questions. So this is something that's, maybe a bit of a hot topic, but if the students were doing a grammar test, for example, and they didn't understand a vocabulary word, I'm not assessing their vocabulary, I'm assessing their grammar. So I may decide to, if they ask me, Emily, what does, differentiate mean? I may give them that definition, because that's not helping them get to the grammar. That's helping them understand enough to be able for me to get a language sample for what they need. I may have to gloss some vocabulary, etc. And then also giving them an assessment choice. So you have to either give a presentation or a poster. Which one do you want to do? You have to either make a video or write an essay. Which one do you want to do? You have two choices. You have to show me you can do this in one of these, and you give them a little bit of choice there. Maybe not too much choice, but a little choice. Again, pronunciation, I've got to hurry quickly. Pronunciation, I might, if they were beginners, we would just do this. Read through this. We're going to have a talk. If they were intermediate, I would have them practice intonation. Hey, Chantel, what do you want to do this weekend? Falling tone. On the weekend, I wake up and first I make breakfast. So we would do some intonation, word stress. If they were advanced, I might have them, write their own script, mark them, mark intonation, mark stress, mark rhythm, and then maybe they have to complete the conversation and really make it a lot more difficult. So that's something I would do. If you don't use ELO is really great. It's World Englishes, and they're all leveled. Very, very quickly, how to give feedback. Try to make it individualized as possible. You can also give group feedback. I like to use VoiceThread for that. They can be private. Zoom or Teams, breakout rooms channels, OneNote, Google Document. They're just all kinds of different ways. OneNote especially is to give private comments and then public comments. I read something in my assessment workshop that basically said, if you give an assignment with no feedback, it is not valuable. So if you're not going to give an assignment feedback, there's no point. And I think that's something to always be thinking about as well. Quickly, in terms of feedback. Again, you can decide if a beginner, I might use some L1 to kind of help them to make sure they understand what I want them to do. Simple vocabulary, simple syntax, write my feedback and then say my feedback so it's very clear, especially online. And then I might even give a model response for them to write back to me. Emily, I understand you. Thank you for your feedback. So they understand, like, I know that they understood what I told them to do. And they can translate. Why? It's feedback, of course. Translate it all day long, right? It's ELO with 3 L's. Renata, ELLLO. It's got 3 L's. ELLLO.org. Yeah. And then if they're advanced, again, you don't have to modify very much necessarily. I would still give them writing and speaking feedback, but I'm going to talk to them very, very naturally. ELLLO. Oh, I typed it in. It didn't go. There we go. And then again, lastly, what technology would I use? If you use ELO, there it is there, Randall's ESL, Breaking News English, Nearpod. There's so many things, you're welcome. There's so many things that you can find that has different levels so that they've already done the hard work for you, that students can find listenings at different levels. You can use this as a teacher or have just send it to students and let them do it. Same thing with TED Talks is too. Breaking News English, love everything about it. Absolutely. All right, so I'm out of time. So again, is there one takeaway that you would walk away with that you think was helpful? There's the references, so all of that's there. Is there anything, questions that you guys have, anything that you want to share? That would be awesome. And then here's my contact information. If you want to find me on Instagram, ESL Emily, there's my picture, there's my email, phone number on WhatsApp. Although I think people, WhatsApp is having a bit of a conspiracy, but essentially, if you want to contact me, there you are. of course, I'm happy to talk more about it, answer questions. This could have been so exhaustive. I tried to hit all of the highlights for what I think pertains to us, but definitely there was more to say. And then next time we'll talk a lot about building your communities and networking as well. And we'll have some fun videos as well. I'm excited for less talking from me next time. Yeah, you're welcome. It's welcome.
Thanks a lot, Emily.
Marcin, I think over to you.
Yeah. Thanks, Emily. That was wonderful. As always, so many ideas and so many things to try out just like tomorrow, right? And experience. So thanks a lot. And we had a very good comments on Facebook as well. People sharing their ideas, but very similar to those that we had here in our room. I'm so happy that our breakout rooms also worked just right. So once again, thanks a lot to you, Emily, and we're looking forward to your next webinars. Thanks a lot. I would like to, guys, I would like to remind you guys about ITAFL website. If you, Emily, allow, I would love to refer you to our ITAFL Poland website, because here we've got quite a new section. And this section is mostly in Polish, but this is called Get Inspired. And here we publish very short but rich in inspirations articles in Polish and in English about the common topics in online learning, but also as far as the calendar goes. So we've got a Grandma's and Grandpa's Day soon. So we can take a look at the grandparents' day rhymes, right, in Poland here. So you can find a lot of inspiration here. And I also would like to remind you that soon, in 2 days, we're going to have yet another webinar. This time it will be the webinar by Alicja Gałązka and Alex Thorpe. It will be on 21st January. And it's going to be about centrality of communicative competence in English language teaching and assessment. So this is probably a bit more a topic which is more concerned about, well, the end product. That's what I assume. But without what Emily today presented, we couldn't have this end product, right? So thank you very much, Emily. It's been great to have you here, and all the best to you guys. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.